The sun beat down like a merciless drum over Dustwood's cracked earth, smearing long shadows across the parched main street. Heat shimmered off the rooftops, bending the world into a wavering dream, but nothing about today was a dream for Calamity Jane. She stood at the steps of the leaning town chapel, her white dress stained with dust, her hands shaking so hard the small lace gloves barely clung to her fingers. Boone Cutter stood beside her, broad and sun-scorched, a pistol pressed against her temple, his thumb cocking back the hammer with a lazy, practiced motion. His breath stank of whiskey and cruelty. "Go on, preacher," Boone growled, his voice low and oily. "Ain't got all day." The preacher, a thin, balding man whose collar hung limp with sweat, fumbled the Bible in his trembling hands. His gaze flickered across the gathered townsfolk, but no help came. They watched from shaded porches and behind windows, faces pinched with guilt and fear. Boone Cutter owned this town in ways no deed ever could. Calamity Jane swallowed hard, tasting bile. Her father had died coughing up blood in the spring, their farm swallowed by debts no banker wanted to forget. She had no brothers, no cousins close enough to care. Only Boone, ruthless, land-hungry Boone, had come knocking, not with offers but demands. The preacher cleared his throat, voice cracking. "Do you, Boone Cutter, take this woman?" A cold finger of dread crawled up Calamity Jane's spine. She couldn't hear the rest. The world narrowed to Boone's gloating smirk, the black mouth of the pistol barrel, the heavy silence of her neighbors doing nothing. Her heart pounded in her chest like a trapped bird. She thought of running, but Boone's men stood on the edge of the street, rifles slung easy across their backs, grinning like this was a fine afternoon's entertainment. Tears blurred her vision. She blinked them back fiercely. If she had to die, she wouldn't give Boone the satisfaction of seeing her weep. The preacher's voice wavered. "And do you, Calamity Jane, take this man?" Boone leaned close, his breath hot and sour on her cheek. "Say it, sweetheart," he whispered, the hammer of the gun cocking louder. "Or I'll say it for you." The sound of distant hoofbeats cracked the heavy air. Boone stiffened. So did his men. Heads turned down the long road stretching beyond town, a thin ribbon of dust rising where the horizon boiled. Calamity Jane dared a glance. Out of the heat shimmer came a rider, alone. A lean figure atop a pale dun horse, moving at a steady, unhurried pace. Hat pulled low, a long coat flapping against lean legs. Whoever he was, he rode like he belonged to the land itself, worn into it, carved by it. Boone barked a laugh, loud and grating, breaking the stunned silence. "Well, look at that. We got us an audience." The townsfolk drifted back into doorways, anxious to be anywhere but between Boone and whoever had the gall to approach. The preacher stumbled backward, clutching his Bible to his chest like a shield. Boone turned Calamity Jane roughly to face the oncoming rider, the pistol now resting against the base of her skull. "Guess we'll have ourselves a proper wedding witness, huh, darlin'?" The rider drew closer, dust swirling around the horse's legs. He didn't raise his head. He didn't hurry. Just rode straight into the tension strung tighter than a noose across the street. When he finally reined in, not 20 paces from the church, he pushed his hat back with 2 fingers. His face came into view, sharp angles, rough beard, sun-leathered skin. His eyes were the thing that stuck, not fierce but cold, detached, like a man who'd seen every kind of dying and had grown tired of it. "Afternoon," he said, voice low and even. Boone spat into the dirt. "Ain't your business, stranger." The rider's gaze slid to Calamity Jane, lingering for the briefest moment. She stood stiff and shaking, her wrists gripped cruelly in Boone's meaty hand. The message was clear. Boone tightened his hold. "Move along." The rider tilted his head slightly, studying Boone like he might study a rattler coiled in the dust. "Seems to me," he said, voice carrying easily across the street, "you're fixin' to marry a gal who don't look none too willin' to." Boone's men chuckled, low, uneasy sounds. Boone bared his teeth in a snarl. "You got 2 choices, mister," Boone said, pressing the gun harder against Calamity Jane's head. "Get back on that nag of yours and ride out, or I plant you where you stand." The rider sighed like he was being asked to shovel someone else's manure. He swung a leg over and dropped to the ground, dust puffing around his boots. His hand hovered near his belt, but he didn't draw. Boone laughed again. "What, you think you're fast enough to take all of us?" The rider shrugged. "Don't have to be." Boone squinted, puzzled. The rider smiled faintly, not a warm smile, but the grim sort that said he'd already measured Boone's grave in his mind. "You ain't fast enough to shoot me and keep her alive," the rider said. For a moment, the street held its breath. Boone's face twisted. His eyes darted to Calamity Jane, then back to the stranger. his mind working slower than fear could travel. Calamity Jane felt it, the hesitation. A sharp wind picked up, tugging at her torn veil, sending it fluttering into the street like a ghost. Boone cursed under his breath and made his decision. The gun moved, swinging from Calamity Jane toward the rider. That was all it took. The rider's hand flashed, faster than thought, faster than breath. A single shot cracked through the air. Boone staggered, dropping his pistol, clutching his hand as blood welled bright between his fingers. Before Boone's men could react, the rider had Calamity Jane by the wrist, jerking her down the chapel steps. "Move," he barked, shoving her toward his horse. Shots rang out behind them, wild and panicked. Calamity Jane ducked instinctively, heart hammering against her ribs. The rider lifted her onto the saddle like she weighed no more than a sack of flour, swung up behind her, and kicked the horse hard into a gallop. They tore down the street, bullets whining past, townsfolk scattering like dry leaves. Behind them, Boone howled with rage, his wounded hand dripping red onto the dust. The town shrank away behind them, lost in a haze of gun smoke and cowardice. Calamity Jane clutched the saddle horn with both hands, the rider's arm firm around her waist, the world a blur of speed and fear and freedom. She didn't know where they were going. She didn't even know his name. But for the first time in months, she wasn't waiting for someone else to decide her fate. Ahead lay only open land, and the devil they'd left behind would surely come hunting. The rider bent low over the horse's neck, voice tight against her ear. "Hold on, girl," he said, "this ain't over yet." And somehow, despite the fear clawing at her insides, Calamity Jane smiled. Because neither was she. The horse ran hard, hooves tearing up the dry earth, and Calamity Jane held on with a grip that turned her knuckles white. Wind screamed in her ears, tugging her hair loose from its pins, stinging her eyes with dust and tears she didn't dare wipe away. Every heartbeat counted, every breath carried the bitter tang of fear. Behind them, the gunfire had fallen away, but Boone Cutter wouldn't give up so easy. He was the kind of man who'd chase a grudge clear to hell's doorstep if it meant keeping his pride intact. The rider slowed only when they reached a jagged ridge a few miles out, sheltering them in the broken teeth of the land. He swung down, scanned the horizon, then reached up and helped Calamity Jane dismount, his hands firm but careful, as if afraid she might break. Calamity Jane stumbled when her boots hit the ground, legs trembling from terror and the wild ride. The rider caught her elbow, steadying her, his face unreadable under the brim of his battered hat. "You hurt?" he asked, voice rough, stripped of anything but necessity. She shook her head, though every muscle in her body ached, and her ribs felt squeezed tight by panic. Words tangled in her throat. He had saved her. No one else in that whole miserable town had even tried. "Name's Elijah Kane," he said, still scanning the empty land. "Figure you ought to know who you're running with." "Calamity Jane," she managed, her voice no more than a whisper. "Calamity Jane." He nodded once. Businesslike. No false comforts. A distant dust cloud rose on the horizon. Riders. Boone's men. Calamity Jane saw Elijah's mouth tighten. He grabbed the reins, swung back into the saddle, and pulled her up behind him without asking. Her arms went around his waist instinctively. He was solid, all lean muscle and wiry strength, the kind of man built by hard trails and harder choices. "Hang on," he said. "Town ain't no safer than the trail, but we need to resupply." They rode hard for a small settlement wedged between two rocky bluffs. Rust Creek, no more than a scattering of buildings clinging to life like stubborn weeds. By the time they clattered into the main street, Calamity Jane was dizzy from heat and fear. Rust Creek looked no different than Dustwood, weather-beaten storefronts, a single watering trough, horses tied loose and half asleep under the midday sun. Men sat outside the saloon playing cards and pretending not to watch. Elijah swung down and helped her off. His eyes scanned the street, reading it like a man might read the first rumblings of a coming storm. "Keep close," he murmured. Calamity Jane nodded, clutching the folds of her torn dress. Inside the saloon, the air smelled of whiskey, sweat, and broken dreams. A piano in the corner had long since fallen silent. Rough men nursed drinks, their faces turning at the newcomers. Elijah pushed open the swinging doors, Calamity Jane tight at his side. Every pair of eyes followed them, calculating, weighing the odds. She could feel it, the way these men smelled trouble, the way wolves smelled blood. The barkeep, a broad-shouldered man with a walrus mustache, polished a glass that hadn't been clean in years. "What'll it be?" he asked, voice wary. "Whiskey." "Water," Elijah said. He dropped a silver coin on the bar. "And a room with a back door." The barkeep nodded slowly, eyes lingering on Calamity Jane's ripped dress and bruised wrists. His mouth pressed into a line, but he said nothing. Just slid the bottle and a glass down the bar, then jerked his head toward the stairwell. Calamity Jane sipped the water Elijah poured for her, her hands trembling so badly she spilled some. Elijah pretended not to notice. He watched the room instead, his fingers resting lightly on the revolver at his hip. "Town's full of cowards," Elijah said under his breath. "Don't count on 'em to lift a finger when trouble comes." Calamity Jane's throat tightened. It was the same everywhere. Men who would shake your hand in daylight but vanish come the first crack of gunfire. She set the glass down carefully. "You shouldn't have come for me." His gaze flicked to her, sharp and unexpected. Somebody had to. The words cut deep. She didn't know how to answer them. No one had chosen her side before. Not once. Elijah took a slow sip of whiskey, eyes still sweeping the saloon. "Boone's close. Feel it in my bones." "What do we do?" she asked. He gave a tight smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "Pray he's stupider than he looks." They climbed the rickety stairs to a small room overlooking the alley. A narrow bed, a cracked mirror, and a back door leading to the open hills beyond. Elijah bolted the front door and pulled the curtains tight. He checked his revolver, spinning the cylinder once, then tucking it back into his holster. Calamity Jane sank onto the bed, the mattress groaning under her weight. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to hold herself together. The room felt too small, too fragile to contain the fear clawing at her insides. Elijah crouched beside the door, his back against the wall, one knee bent. "Always ready. Always watching." "I can fight," she said suddenly, surprising even herself. He looked at her. Really looked this time. Not at her bruises or torn dress, but at the fire starting to kindle behind her tired eyes. "Ever shot a man?" he asked. She hesitated, then shook her head. He didn't smile. Didn't mock her. Just said, "Hope you don't have to." The minutes dragged. Every creak of floorboard, every gust of wind outside the window made Calamity Jane jump. She hated it. Hated feeling like prey. Elijah sat like a rock, still and patient. She wondered what kind of life had carved that steadiness into him. What losses he carried hidden beneath the dust and leather. A noise downstairs, the heavy tread of boots. Voices raised in anger. Calamity Jane's heart jumped to her throat. Elijah rose in one smooth motion, gun drawn, his finger resting easy on the trigger. The barkeep's voice floated up through the floorboards, tight, forced. "Ain't seen nobody fitting that description." Another voice answered, Boone's oily with rage. "Lion's sack of..." The crash of breaking glass cut him off. Calamity Jane's breath caught. They'd come. Boone hadn't wasted time licking his wounds. He was here. He was hunting. Elijah jerked his head toward the back door. "Go." Calamity Jane didn't argue. She grabbed her skirts and slipped through, heart hammering so loud she could hardly hear her own footsteps. The alley was narrow, filled with trash and the sour stink of old beer. They moved fast, darting from shadow to shadow, slipping between leaning buildings. Shouts behind them. Boots pounding on the saloon floor. Boone's men spilling into the street like a pack of wild dogs. Elijah's hand found her wrist, tugging her along. They burst out into open land, the town falling away behind them. Sunlight blinded her, the heat like a wall. But Calamity Jane didn't stop. Didn't stumble. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out, collapsing behind a fallen boulder out in the scrublands. Elijah knelt beside her, scanning the rise behind them. "They'll track us," he said grimly. "Ain't no place to hide out here." Calamity Jane wiped sweat from her brow, breathing hard. "Then what?" He looked at her, a flicker of something fierce and proud sparking in his eyes. "Then we stop running." The words sank deep. A choice. Not to be hunted. Not to be helpless. To stand. For the first time since Boone Cutter had barged into her life, Calamity Jane felt a glimmer of something sharp and stubborn stirring in her chest. She looked out across the endless wild, the broken land stretching to the horizon, and nodded. "All right," she said. "Let's make our stand." The desert wind carried their words away, but the promise in them stayed, stronger than steel. Behind them, the town of cowards faded into dust. Ahead, the real battle waited. And this time, Calamity Jane wasn't going to face it on her knees. The afternoon sun scorched the landscape to the color of old bones. Calamity Jane and Elijah moved. Through it like ghosts, slipping from rocky outcrops to shallow gullies, always with one eye on the horizon. The land stretched wide and cruel around them. No shelter, no mercy. Only the constant knowledge that behind them Boone Cutter was coming. Each step ground sand into Calamity Jane's blistered feet. Her dress snagged on thorn bushes, her throat burned from thirst, but she didn't complain. Couldn't. There was no room left for weakness. Only survival. Elijah paused at the crest of a narrow ridge, scanning the wasteland below. His hand rested on his revolver without thought, as natural as breathing. He wasn't a talker, Calamity Jane had learned. He listened to the land, to the air itself, catching whispers she couldn't hear. A thin trail of dust rose miles behind them. "They're gaining," he muttered, eyes narrowing against the sun. Calamity Jane squinted. She could just make out the faint shapes of riders moving like ants across the desert floor. "How many?" she asked, voice dry as the dust under her boots. "5. Maybe 6. Her stomach twisted. Boone wouldn't rest until he had her under his boot again, and Elijah dead in the dirt. She touched the small pistol he had given her that morning, tucked awkwardly into the waistband of her dress. It felt alien, heavy, but oddly reassuring. She wasn't defenseless anymore. Elijah turned to her. "We can't outrun him. Horses near spent and we're on foot now." Calamity Jane straightened her shoulders, swallowing her fear. "Then we fight." A shadow of a smile flickered across Elijah's face, brief but real. "Got grit," he said quietly, almost to himself. They moved into the narrow canyons where the land twisted and rose, creating natural choke points. Elijah's sharp eyes picked a spot, a dead-end hollow ringed by steep rock walls. Nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide. Perfect if you were crazy enough to make a stand. He crouched, sketching quick lines in the dirt with a stick. "When they ride in, they'll bottleneck here. We'll pick him off before they fan out." Calamity Jane knelt beside him, watching. Learning. "You stay low behind that rock," Elijah instructed, pointing. "If one of them gets close, you shoot. Aim for center mass. Don't hesitate." Her hands shook a little as she nodded. She hated the idea of killing, but she hated Boone's laughter in her nightmares more. The minutes crawled by. The land held its breath. Even the cicadas fell silent. Calamity Jane crouched in the dirt, pistol ready, heart pounding so loud she was sure it would give them away. Then came the riders. Their hooves clattered against stone, echoing like gunshots. Boone's harsh voice barked orders, and his men, half drunk on anger and dust, thundered into the narrow canyon. The first shot cracked like lightning. One of Boone's men pitched backward off his horse, hitting the ground in a dead sprawl. The canyon erupted in chaos. Elijah moved like something carved from pure violence, firing, reloading, ducking behind boulders. Calamity Jane pressed her back against the rock, breath held tight in her lungs. A shadow loomed. One of Boone's men broke from the others, charging toward her with a wild yell. Calamity Jane raised the pistol, hands trembling. He was so close she could see the sweat dripping down his temple, the mad gleam in his eye. She squeezed the trigger. The gun bucked in her hands, the shot deafening in the narrow space. The man jerked sideways, crumpling with a grunt. His rifle clattered from his hands and slid into the dust. Calamity Jane gasped, heart hammering. She had done it. She had saved herself. No time to think. More gunfire crackled around them. Boone roared from somewhere deeper in the canyon, fury twisting his voice into something inhuman. "Kill them both," he bellowed. "Make him suffer." Another rider fell under Elijah's merciless aim. Another turned tail, spurring his horse hard, dust trailing behind him like a comet. The fight tightened into brutal, dirty skirmishes, fists against flesh, blades flashing in the sun. Calamity Jane ducked low, crawling toward Elijah when she saw him stumble. Blood soaked the sleeve of his coat, crimson blooming like a deadly flower. "You're hit," she cried, reaching for him. "Just a scratch," he grunted, shoving a fresh cartridge into his revolver with grim efficiency. "Ain't dead yet." Calamity Jane grabbed the dropped rifle from the man she had shot. It was heavy, unfamiliar, but she found the trigger, found the weight of it in her arms. Another of Boone's men rounded a boulder, eyes wild, gun swinging up. Calamity Jane didn't think. She fired. The man crumpled before he could pull his trigger, falling hard onto the stones. Silence fell. Calamity Jane's breath rasped in her throat. Elijah crouched beside her, blood dripping from his sleeve, dust clinging to every inch of him. "That all of him?" she whispered. He nodded once. "All but Boone." A chill slid down her spine. She knew deep in her bones Boone wouldn't die easy. As if summoned by the thought, Boone's voice echoed down the canyon. "You think you can hide behind rocks forever?" he sneered. "You think that fancy shot of yours means a damn thing?" Elijah helped Calamity Jane to her feet. His hand, rough and warm, lingered on her shoulder. "This ends today," he said. She nodded. No more running. No more cowering. They stepped out into the open, the canyon walls rising like silent witnesses around them. Boone sat atop his horse, his hand wrapped in a bloodied bandage from where Elijah had shot him before. His face twisted into something feral when he saw them. Well, he sneered. A little farm girl and a half-dead drifter. Thought you could outsmart me? He dismounted, tossing the reins aside. His pistol gleamed in the harsh light. You ain't walking away from this, he promised, voice thick with hate. Calamity Jane gripped her rifle tighter, planting her feet. Elijah raised his revolver, steady despite the blood soaking through his shirt. Boone stalked forward, slow and deliberate. Drop the gun, girl, he barked. Ain't no shame in knowing your place. Calamity Jane lifted her chin. Her voice, when it came, was clear and unshaking. My place ain't at your feet. Boone's face turned red with rage. He lunged forward, raising his pistol. The crack of a shot split the air. Boone staggered, staring down at the dark hole blooming in his chest. He turned bewildered eyes toward Calamity Jane. She held the rifle steady, smoke curling from the barrel. Boone fell to his knees, then to his face, the dust swallowing him whole. The canyon held its breath. Calamity Jane stood over him, heart hammering, the rifle still clutched in both hands. Elijah lowered his revolver slowly. His face was a mix of pain, pride, and something else she couldn't quite name. It was over. Or at least this part was. Calamity Jane dropped the rifle into the dust, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline ebbed. She felt Elijah's hand on her shoulder again, grounding her, steadying her. You done good, Calamity Jane, he said quietly. She looked at him, really looked, saw the man who had stood between her and a fate worse than death, not because he had to, but because he chose to. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back. We ain't done yet, she said. Elijah gave a slow nod, respect shining in his weary gaze. Together, they turned toward the open land beyond the canyon. No town. No safe harbor. Just a long, hard trail stretching into the unknown. But for the first time in her life, Calamity Jane wasn't afraid of it. Because now she knew she could fight. She could stand. She could survive. The devil had chased them across the dust and stone, but they had stood their ground. And they were still standing. The sun dipped low, setting the world ablaze in gold and fire. The canyon lay silent behind them, a graveyard for the men who had thought blood and cruelty could carve the world to their liking. Ahead, the open land stretched endless and raw, daring them forward. Elijah leaned heavy in the saddle, blood soaking through his makeshift bandage. Calamity Jane rode close beside him, the weight of the last hours pressing against her shoulders, but not breaking them. Somewhere along that bloody trail, she had shed the last tattered remnants of the girl who had stood trembling at a preacher's altar with a gun pressed to her head. Now she was something harder. Something stronger. They rode until the stars bled out across the sky and the land grew cold. A lone cottonwood tree stood crooked against the horizon, its black silhouette a finger clawing at the heavens. Elijah pulled up there, swaying slightly in the saddle before sliding down. Calamity Jane jumped down too, catching his arm as he staggered. You need rest, she said, voice firm. Don't got time, he muttered, grimacing. You'll bleed out if you don't, she snapped back. He gave a faint, crooked smile, an acknowledgement, an apology, maybe even a hint of admiration. Then he let her guide him to sit against the rough bark. The night pressed close, full of rustling grass and distant coyote calls. Calamity Jane lit a small fire, shielding it with stones so the glow wouldn't give them away. Elijah's face looked carved from stone, the firelight catching the hollows of his cheeks, the dark smudges under his eyes. He watched her work with a weariness that went deeper than the wound in his arm. She tore a strip from what remained of her dress and cleaned the blood away, hands steady now. You're good at patching up, he rasped. Had to be, she said quietly. When Pa got sick, I was the only one left to tend him. The fire cracked, throwing up sparks into the vast, indifferent sky. Elijah's eyes closed briefly. Then he said, was a girl once. Bright. Full of spit and vinegar. Name was Annie. She waited for me to come home from the war. Calamity Jane's hands froze. When I finally did, Elijah continued, voice rough, Boone had already found her. Took what he wanted. Left her with nothing but shame. He opened his eyes, and they were hollower than any wound could make them. She put a bullet in her heart before I could set it right. Calamity Jane said nothing. There were no words big enough to stitch that kind of wound. You remind me of her, Elijah said, voice low. But you're stronger. You didn't wait to be saved. She squeezed his hand gently, a silent promise that his ghosts were not alone tonight. In the distance, a new sound broke the night, the faint thunder of hooves. Calamity Jane rose to her feet, heart thudding. "They're still coming," she said. Elijah forced himself upright, biting back a grunt of pain. He buckled on his belt, checked his revolver. Only 3 bullets left. Calamity Jane checked the rifle she'd taken. 2 shots. Would have to be enough. They moved to the edge of the little hollow, crouching low. The stars threw down enough silver light to see shapes moving through the grass. 2 riders, maybe 3, moving slow, careful. Boone's leftovers. The last of the pack. Calamity Jane looked at Elijah. His face was hard, unreadable. "Stay low," he said. "Pick your shots." The first rider edged closer, the gleam of a rifle barrel catching the starlight. Calamity Jane aimed, heart pounding in her ears, every sense sharpened to a razor's edge. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared and the rider toppled like a broken doll. Chaos exploded. Gunfire cracked the night open. Calamity Jane dropped flat as bullets tore up the dirt around her. Elijah fired once, twice. Clean, measured shots. Another rider screamed and fell. 1 left. The last man charged straight at them, crazed by fear and fury, gun blazing. Calamity Jane scrambled backward, fumbling for another round. Elijah stepped forward into the open, calm as sunrise. The final shot from his revolver dropped the last man in a heap at his horse's feet. Silence slammed down again. Calamity Jane crawled to Elijah's side, heart in her throat. "You hit." He shook his head, though he sagged a little more with every breath. "It's over," she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "No," Elijah said softly, staring out into the empty land. "Not until you decide." Calamity Jane frowned, not understanding. "You got a choice now, Calamity Jane," he said. "You can ride back to Dustwood. Let him pat you on the head. Marry some man who'll think he's doing you a kindness." She shook her head fiercely. "Or," Elijah said, his voice dipping lower, "you can keep riding. Make your own way. Live by your own hand." He looked at her then, really looked, and in his eyes was not pity, not protection, but respect. "No one gets to choose for you anymore," he said. "Not Boone. Not me." Calamity Jane felt something crack open in her chest. A final, shattering goodbye to the girl who had once waited for a savior. She stood slowly, the night wind pulling her hair loose around her shoulders. "I ain't going back," she said. Elijah's smile was weary but genuine. "Figured you'd say that." He pushed to his feet with a grunt, wobbling a little. Calamity Jane slid under his arm without a word, steadying him. Together they saddled the tired horse. Together they turned their backs on the graveyard behind them. They rode slow at first, the stars wheeling overhead, the land whispering promises of hardship and hope in equal measure. At the top of a low ridge, Calamity Jane pulled the horse to a stop and looked back. Dustwood was a smudge on the horizon. Boone Cutter was just another story to scare children by firelight. Fear was still out there, still waiting, but so was freedom. Beside her, Elijah tipped his hat low against the night. "Where to, Miss Dalton?" She grinned, the first real grin she'd felt in years. "Anywhere but back." He chuckled, a dry, cracked sound but real. "Good answer." They nudged the horse forward, the world opening up in front of them, vast and merciless and full of fierce, stubborn life. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled and Calamity Jane laughed, sharp and wild and free. The world was still dangerous. But now she was too. And she reckoned that was fair enough.
The golden prairie stretched so far it seemed to touch the edge of the world. That evening it was too still. Not a single bird called. Not a single breeze stirred the grass. Just the distant column of smoke rising like a crooked finger pointing toward heaven. Silas Boone sat tall in the saddle, his hat shadowing a weathered face. He hadn't planned to ride out this far. Fence checks, a missing steer, some restless thinking. He told himself any excuse would do. But now, with that smoke curling over the next ridge, unease pulled him forward. His horse, June, shifted under him, ears twitching. She smelled it too, something wrong. The first signs came quiet. A boot lying in the dust, torn and stained. A wheel half buried in churned soil. Then the smell, burned wood, scorched leather. And something worse. He dismounted and walked the last yards with his rifle drawn. The wagon had been elegant once, painted deep green, its iron fittings imported. Now it lay twisted and broken, one wheel turned skyward like a snapped limb. Smoke still drifted from the wreckage, its canvas canopy collapsed and burned to rags. Bodies lay around it. 3 men, all shot clean through. One still clutched a rusted revolver in a stiff hand. Another's vest was torn open, blood dried across his chest. They weren't outlaws, at least not dressed like ones. Clean boots, polished buckles. One had a silk cravat twisted around his throat. Then he saw her. She was slumped beside the wagon, her back against a broken trunk. At first, Silas thought she was dead. Her white dress was soaked and clinging, streaked red and ash gray, a far thing from its likely fine origin. Her hat lay a few feet away, trampled. Her hair was the color of warm sand, tangled with leaves. But she breathed, barely. He moved quick, scanning the area before crouching. "Miss," he said softly. No answer. He reached out to touch her shoulder. She flinched so hard she struck his arm away, eyes wide, wild. For a moment he thought she'd scream. But she didn't. Just stared at him, lips parted, chest rising fast. "It's all right," he said. "Ain't gonna hurt you." Still nothing. She looked past him, searching for something that wasn't there. Silas pulled a canteen from his saddle and held it out. She didn't take it. He touched it to her lips. She drank in short, panicked sips before coughing hard. Only then did he notice what she held, clutched like a lifeline. A small leather satchel, edges scorched. She had one arm wrapped around it tight, even as she shook. He glanced behind him. No movement. No dust on the horizon. But this wasn't the place to wait around. He hoisted her gently. She hissed in pain, but still didn't speak. She wasn't heavy, but she was stiff like dried wood. He set her sideways on June, climbed up behind, and wrapped one arm around her waist to steady her. She let him. That was something. They rode west. The sun dipped behind the hills, setting the prairie on fire with orange and gold. Shadows stretched long, chasing them toward the edge of his land. He glanced over his shoulder more than once. The feeling hadn't left him. Someone had done this, and someone might still be watching. By the time they reached his ranch, the sky was deep blue and cooling fast. His house sat low and plain, cedarwood faded to gray, porch sagging just slightly. Smoke rose from the chimney. He'd lit the fire that morning thinking it might be a cold night. He hadn't expected company. He helped her down. She stumbled. He caught her, felt her bones beneath the ruined dress. She wasn't just wounded. She was starved, dehydrated, used up. Inside, he cleared the cot near the fire and laid her down. She didn't let go of the satchel, not even as she sank into the blankets. He brought water, a clean cloth, broth from the pot, hanging on the hook. She drank that more willingly, her eyes tracking his every movement. Still not a word. "Name's Silas," he said, sitting a little ways off. "Silas Boone. You don't gotta talk, but I figured you'd like to know who's bandaging your shoulder." She blinked. No nod. Just a long, slow exhale. He worked quietly, cleaning dried blood from her temple, checking for broken bones. Nothing too deep, but she had a nasty gash near the collarbone, probably grazed by a bullet. Whoever attacked didn't care if she lived or died. By morning, her breathing had steadied. Her skin had color again, but she hadn't slept much. Neither had he. She sat up when he brought coffee. Not proper coffee, but strong enough to keep a man awake through trail work. She took the mug, her hands trembling, but drank. Her eyes never left him. She looked foreign to this world. Not just clean, elegant in some ghostly way, even with her face smudged and hair in disarray. The dress had lace at the sleeves. Her boots were polished leather with silver buttons. And her posture, she sat like someone who had learned to be watched her whole life. He tried again. "You remember what happened?" No answer. "Where you were headed?" Still nothing. He sighed, sipped his own mug. "I don't need trouble, miss. But if someone's looking for you, I gotta know what we're up against." She lowered the mug, eyes flickering to the door. Then, softly, she said, "They killed everyone." He froze. Her voice was hoarse, clipped, like every word cost her. "I saw them coming," she said. 3 riders. We thought, maybe just a warning. Then came the fire. Who were they? I don't know. Her eyes darkened. But they weren't after money. What then? She hesitated, then looked down at the satchel. He leaned forward. That thing worth killing for? I suppose it is. They sat in silence. The fire popped. Outside, a coyote howled. She said, "You should have left me." He shook his head. "That ain't how I'm wired." She looked at him long and slow, as if measuring something behind his quiet drawl, the calluses on his hands, the war in his eyes. "I don't remember your name," she said. "Silas." "Genevieve," she whispered. "Genevieve LeClaire." That name struck something faint in his memory. A headline. A land deed. He didn't know for sure, but he knew enough to realize she didn't belong to this dirt and smoke. And now she was his problem. That night, after she slept, he walked out onto the porch. Moonlight painted the grass silver. The wind rustled the dry leaves in the cottonwood trees. He stared toward the horizon, toward the wreckage that still burned in his memory. He'd lived 10 years in quiet. Fences, horses, harvests, and silence. And now fate had dropped something delicate and dangerous into his lap. He lit a cigarette and leaned on the rail. "LeClaire," he said under his breath. "What the hell have you dragged in with you?" Behind him, something creaked. A floorboard. He turned. But the doorway was empty. And Genevieve LeClaire was no longer in the bed. She stood at the far end of the porch, staring into the prairie like it might answer something for her. The moon lit her white dress in silver, her figure a ghost against the horizon. Silas didn't speak right away, just watched. "You shouldn't be on your feet," he finally said. Genevieve didn't turn. "I don't sleep well." He stepped beside her, slow. She didn't flinch this time. Her arms were folded, one hand still cradling the satchel, as if letting it go would unmake her. "You walk off like that again," he said gently. "You're liable to step into a snake pit or worse." "I'm used to worse," she said flatly. He wanted to press, but the look in her eyes made it clear she wouldn't give more, not tonight. So he simply said, "Come inside. Prairie's colder than it looks." She followed. The next few days passed like a quiet standoff. She moved carefully, never saying much, never sleeping deeply. He watched the way she studied his ranch, every nail, every hinge, every gate. Not with suspicion, but with the eyes of someone who'd never seen real work before. Or maybe someone who had and was trying to remember what it felt like. Genevieve didn't talk about the massacre again. She didn't mention names or motives. But her silences spoke plenty. She refused to change into anything but the clean cloths he laid out. His late sister's dress, pale blue and worn soft. She refused to sit with her back to any door. She ate in small, precise bites, even when her stomach growled loud enough to hear across the room. Still, every morning, she walked. Her white dress swayed through tall grass, and her eyes scanned the horizon like a soldier tracing ridgelines. Silas would watch from the barn. She didn't know he did. One afternoon, he found her repairing his saddle strap. She sat in the barn, sleeves rolled up, hands steady as she stitched through the leather. He stared at her a moment before speaking. "You don't sew like a lady from Boston." "I wasn't raised in Boston." "No," he said. "Where then?" "Versailles. Until I was 15. She didn't look up. "After that, I was moved from country to country. Private tutors. Estate homes. Smiles and expectations." He leaned on the post. "And now you're here, with a bullet hole in your shoulder and blood on your shoes." "I've downgraded." He almost smiled. "Dry, that one. I thought you didn't want to talk." "I don't. But you're too quiet. It's unnerving." He chuckled, and she looked up at him. A flicker passed between them, not warmth yet, but something that might one day become it. He asked, "So why they target your wagon?" She shook her head. "Because I have something someone else wants. Because men believe power belongs only in certain hands. Because money blinds people." She stood and handed him the strap. The stitching was tight and even. Military standard. "You've done this before," he noted. Genevieve tilted her head. "Not horses. Uniforms." The satchel again. Always near her, even when she slept. He'd seen her read from it in the mornings. Pages filled with markings, land grids, numbers. One page had the seal of the territorial office, half burned but still legible. "You were sent here to claim something, weren't you?" he asked. "Yes," she said, not elaborating. "And now someone's trying to stop you." Genevieve said nothing, but her hand went to the satchel like a reflex. That night, he heard her crying. Not loud, not broken. Just the kind of cry a person does when they're trying hard not to. The kind you feel in your own chest even when you're in another room. He didn't interrupt, but he stoked the fire and made sure the door was barred tight. The next day brought footprints again, fresh ones, in the mud near the south pasture. He found them while riding the fence line. Not his boots, not hers. Someone else had been there, watching. Silas came back faster than he should have. When he stormed into the house, Genevieve had already noticed. What is it? Someone's been near the fence. Could be scouts. Could be worse. He pulled open the cabinet and checked his rifles. Loaded. Ready. Genevieve stood near the door, pale but not afraid. They're coming. He turned to her. How many? I don't know. But I saw the man who gave the order. The one who stayed back while the others rode in. He wasn't hired muscle. Who then? She looked him dead in the eye. A government man. Or one pretending to be. He wanted something signed. My signature. When I refused, he sent them. Silas swore under his breath. You've got something they want buried. She nodded. A land claim for the LeClaire holdings. Hundreds of acres with mineral rights. They want it gone. My signature gives it away. My silence ruins the deal. But my death? That solves everything. He rubbed his jaw. Then we need to get you to the sheriff. No, her voice was sharp. The sheriff might be theirs. I've seen men like this, respectable, charming, and ruthless. If they've bought a lawman, they've already written the report. Then what do you suggest? I just need time, she said. A few days. To get the right documents north. There's a circuit judge who'll take my word. But I need you to get me there. Silas stared at her. And why would I risk my neck for you? Because you're not the kind of man who turns his back on someone who's bleeding. He didn't answer, just walked out onto the porch, lit a match, and stood in the wind, thinking. She followed after a while, arms crossed against the breeze. The white dress danced around her boots. You fought in the war, she asked. He nodded. 20 years ago. Union. Texas Cavalry. We switched sides twice, depending on which way the wind blew. Then I got tired of fighting for men in suits and started fencing land instead. She studied his profile. You still carry it with you. We all do. That night, Silas didn't sleep. He sat by the door with a rifle across his lap. In the morning, he saddled 2 horses, June, and the white one she'd arrived on. When Genevieve saw him, she paused. You're not sending me away? I'm taking you myself, he said. Why? He looked her in the eye. Because I've seen what happens when folks keep their mouths shut. I'm too old to stay silent. She nodded once, then stepped forward and did something neither of them expected. She reached up and touched his hand. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't anything like that. It was something better. Trust. The sun was rising behind her. Her white dress glowed gold at the edges. The prairie wind picked up. And somewhere out there, the men who'd killed her guards were riding again. But this time, she wouldn't be unarmed. And this time, she wouldn't be alone. They rode at dawn, the prairie painted in gold and the wind sharp against their cheeks. Silas rode ahead, his eyes scanning the distant ridgelines. Genevieve followed close behind, her white horse moving with surprising grace for an animal that had seen fire, blood, and ruin. Neither of them spoke much. There was no need. The silence between them had grown familiar now, almost useful. It let them listen, for hooves, for rifle clicks, for betrayal. They didn't take the main trail. Silas led them through cattle routes and dry stream beds, along paths only the locals knew, paths a stranger wouldn't trust, without breaking an ankle or a leg. He had no illusions. Whoever was after her wouldn't give up easy. Men who burned wagons and left corpses didn't stop because the sun rose. By noon, they reached the edge of Dead Elm Pass, a narrow cut between the hills, lined with brittle trees and ghost rock. Genevieve dismounted slowly, brushing a hand along the sandstone, as if it might tell her how many ambushes it had seen. Her dress was dust-stained and sun-faded now. She looked less like a baroness, more like someone who had earned every step of this trail. Silas tossed her a canteen. "You holding up?" "I'm alive," she said, "which is better than I expected this week." She sat on a rock, pulling out the satchel. She'd become less guarded with it, still careful, but no longer secretive. She unfolded a series of parchment sheets. Deeds, maps, letters with elegant seals, some torn, others burned around the edges. "I need to get these to Judge Mathers and Laramie," she said. "They prove everything. That the land wasn't abandoned. That the mineral rights were still mine when they forged the transfer. If he sees these, he'll put a freeze on the claims." Silas took one and studied it. His fingers, rough with years of rope and rifle, traced the edge of a seal. "You sure Mathers is clean? He presided over my father's will. He's the only one who treated me like a human being instead of a transaction." Silas folded the paper. "Then we get you there." He didn't say it out loud, but he already knew what would come next. If the men chasing her caught wind of that plan, they'd set a trap. And if she was right, if this was about land and money and power, then they wouldn't need her alive. They set off again just before dusk. The prairie had changed its tune. Wind cut harder now. Shadows stretched longer than seemed natural. The sun dipped fast behind the hills, and the sky turned bruised purple. Then a sound, distant but unmistakable. Hooves. Silas raised a fist. They stopped. Genevieve pulled up beside him, eyes already searching the slope above. "How many?" she whispered. He listened. 3, maybe 4. She didn't hesitate. "They followed since yesterday. Would have caught up sooner if they weren't being careful," he muttered. "They're watching, waiting for night." They changed course, angling toward Raven's Wash, a dry ravine winding through rock and pine. Not safe, but harder to track. The light was nearly gone when Silas spotted smoke. A thin, curling line above the distant ridge. Someone had made camp, or left a signal. He turned in the saddle. "We can't ride straight into town. Not with that." Genevieve nodded. "Then what?" "We set our own trap." They made camp that night in the wash, just off a narrow ledge behind Fallen Stone. Silas arranged branches and dusted the path to hide hoofprints. Genevieve helped, quietly, precisely. No wasted motion. After the fire was lit, small and smokeless, she sat close, arms wrapped around her knees. "I used to think danger was something you could see coming," she said softly. "A bad man in a dark alley, a pistol drawn. But it's not. It's men in boardrooms, in waistcoats, with smiles." Silas poked the fire with a stick. "And when those smiles fade, they send others to do the bloody part." Genevieve looked at him. "You know a lot about men like that." "I do." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't press. But something passed between them again, an understanding. Two people with blood in their pasts, both trying not to drown in it. He pulled out the small journal he kept in his coat pocket. Not for writing, just for remembering. He tore out a page, wrote quick, and folded it tight. "You ride north tomorrow. Alone. Take this to the preacher in Bentwood Junction. He'll get it to the judge." Her expression turned sharp. "You said you'd take me." "I will. But if we ride together, we make a bigger target. You on your own, they might overlook you for a rider, with no escort. They'll see the dress, the horse." He looked at her long, then changed the dress. "Take June. She's faster." She went quiet, then nodded slowly. "What about you?" "I'll make noise in the other direction. Give them something to follow." She stared at him a long time. "You could die." He smirked faintly. "So could you." Morning came early, the sky barely pink when they packed up. She wore his sister's coat now, gray wool, buttoned to her neck. A wide-brimmed hat tilted low. The satchel was strapped to her side, close under her arm. He handed her the folded note. "Don't lose it." She didn't say, "Thank you." Just took it and looked at him in a way that made his ribs feel tight. "I don't know what you were before this," she said, "but you're a good man now." "Just don't get killed," he said. Then she mounted and rode northeast, alone. Silas waited until she disappeared behind a ridge. Then he set fire to a bundle of sagebrush and kicked his horse into motion. west, toward the smoke he'd seen the night before. He didn't have a plan, just bait. But that would have to do. The wind had changed. It cut down the canyon like a knife, dry and mean, kicking dust off the rocks and whistling past the bones of old mining camps. Silas rode toward the signal fire, eyes narrow, shoulders loose. He carried only one rifle, one revolver, and just enough courage left in him to bluff fate. By the time he reached the base of the ridge, the fire was ash. But fresh boot prints circled the camp. Someone had been there not an hour ago. Someone watching. He dismounted slowly, boots grinding against the stone. He whistled once, low and steady. It echoed off the canyon wall. No response. He crouched beside the ashes. Still warm. Wood not local. Oak. Imported. That meant they'd brought it in, which meant planning. He stood again, heart pounding quiet. A whisper. Behind him. Drop it. The voice came cold and controlled, and Silas didn't need to turn to know a gun was trained on his spine. Turn slow. He did. 3 men. One older, clean-shaven, in a well-fitted coat that didn't belong out here. 2 behind him, faces rough with trail grime, eyes empty. "You Boone?" the lead man asked. Silas didn't answer. The man chuckled. "Doesn't matter. You've been riding with her. That makes you part of the problem." The other 2 moved forward, one snatching his revolver, the other patting him down. "You got no idea what you're in the middle of, friend," the leader said. "This isn't about her. It's about ownership, order. Some people weren't meant to hold land like that." Silas's jaw tensed. She inherited it. Fair and legal. Legal, the man spat, is what the rich say when they want to pretend the game ain't rigged. Silas looked around, noting the terrain. High walls. Narrow choke points. He could draw them away, but not outshoot all 3. Not unless he was lucky. And Silas Boone had never been much for luck. "She's still alive?" the man asked. Silas didn't blink. "Why?" "Because we've had enough trouble cleaning up your mess." Silas shrugged. "Guess you're not as thorough as you think." That earned him a punch across the jaw. He staggered, but didn't fall. Blood touched his tongue. "Careful," he said, spitting into the dirt. "You keep that up, I might wake up." The man laughed again, but it wasn't humor. It was cruelty stretched into sound. "She's heading north," Silas said, "to Laramie. Papers in hand. Judge Mathers'll see them. Then this little game's over." A flicker crossed the man's face, too fast to hide. Silas saw it. "Didn't expect her to live, did you? She should have burned with the rest." That's when Silas moved. He lunged toward the closest man, grabbing the revolver from his own holster and firing once. The man behind him screamed and dropped. A bullet whizzed past Silas's shoulder, hot and furious. He dropped low, rolled into the brush, and fired twice more. Gunfire echoed in the canyon like thunder off dry stone. The second man fell, but the leader ducked behind a boulder, yelling curses. His next shot clipped Silas in the arm, just above the elbow, tearing through muscle. Silas grunted, teeth clenched, vision spinning. But he kept moving, dropped flat, slid along the slope. Then silence. A long, dangerous silence. "You're bleeding out in there," the man called. "You think she'll make it before we do? We've got riders in both passes. We'll find her." Silas crawled closer to the base of the boulder. His fingers trembled. Blood soaked through his sleeve. Then he heard it. A sound from above. Hooves. Fast. The man turned, confused. That was all it took. A shot cracked from a ridge, sharp and final. The man dropped. Genevieve rode down the slope like a ghost on lightning. Her white coat flew behind her. The rifle she held was too large for her frame, but she held it like she meant it. She didn't speak until the dust settled. "I doubled back after Bentwood," she said. "Left the documents with the preacher. Told him to ride through the night." Silas lay back against the rock, breathing hard. "You weren't supposed to come back." She dismounted, knelt beside him. "Neither were you." She wrapped his arm tight, tearing strips from her coat. Her hands were fast, efficient. "No panic. You got good at this," he muttered. "I had good teachers," she said. "Men who thought women couldn't think while bleeding." He laughed, then groaned. She helped him sit up. We need to get you to a doctor. He shook his head. We need to get those papers north. They're already halfway there. He looked at her then, really looked. Her face was streaked with dust and sweat. Her lips were chapped, eyes red from wind and smoke. But her spine was straight, her voice steady. You're not just surviving anymore, he said quietly. You're fighting. I had to. Good. They made their way back to the horses slowly. The sun was climbing again, the prairie stretching out golden and endless. Later that week, in Laramie, Judge Mathers froze the LeClaire land deal and ordered an investigation into the forged signatures. By month's end, 3 territorial officials vanished without a trace. And in the months that followed, a woman in white rode into courtrooms, council chambers, and town halls with a new name stitched beneath her title. Not just Baroness, but witness, survivor, claimant. Genevieve stayed in Wyoming through the spring. So did Silas. They didn't talk much about what happened in the canyon. Some things were better left in the dust. But when folks asked how a rancher and a baroness ended up running cattle on shared land outside Bentwood, neither said a word. They just smiled, and the prairie went on burning gold beneath their boots.